On this day in 1893, Celtic players were attacked on the pitch by home fans after a 4-2 defeat at Abercorn. After winning a glorious trophy treble of Scottish Cup, Glasgow Cup and Glasgow Charities Cup in 1891-92, in February 1893, Celtic had again reached the finals of the Scottish and Glasgow Cups and were chasing what would be their first ever league title win when they arrived in Paisley for a league match against Abercorn, one of the founders of the Scottish League 3 years before. It was an under-strength, but by no means weak Celtic side that faced a team toiling near the bottom of the table. In front of what the Scottish referee of the 13th of February 1893 described as a very large and enthusiastic crowd, they lined up Cullen, Reynolds, Doyle, Clifford, Kelly, Dunbar, Davidson, Blessington, Madden, McMahon, Campbell. The match was a classic case of a technically superior team underestimating and being outworked by dogged and aggressive opponents. After falling 2 goals behind in the first half, Jimmy Davidson pulled one back for Celtic with a long-range shot, and Sandy McMahon headed an equaliser before Abercorn went ahead again just before half-time. They added a 4th early in the second half before Celtic at last began to put them under sustained pressure, but were over-elaborate in front of goal. The Scottish referee reported, "The Celtic blame the heavy footing and greasy ball for the defeat. If they couple this with an overdose of fiddle-faddling, perhaps they will be near the mark. Precious moments were frittered away in cross and fancy passing. They mended this when it was too late." Most of the newspapers mentioned the scenes at the end of the match, if at all, only in passing. Athletic News of the 13th of February merely reported, "There was a disgraceful scene at the finish, and in all probability the police court will be called upon to settle 1 or 2 cases of assault." The Scottish referee gave the most detailed description, with contributions from more than one correspondent. On the front page, the paper wrote in a strangely slanted report, "When the whistle sounded, a mighty shout rent the air from the delighted supporters of the Abercorn, and in a twinkling the crowd had rushed onto the field, apparently to congratulate the team. Players were hoisted shoulder high and carried into the pavilion, but this triumphal march was only the prelude to more serious proceedings. The Celts, when making for the pavilion, were surrounded by a menacing crowd, and a melee ensued. The Celts appeared to be the aggressors, as Doyle was seen to knock down and kick a boy. This aroused the indignation of those standing around, and rough hands were laid on the offender. Other members of the Celtic struck out right and left, and one unfortunate individual received a crushing blow on the mouth from, it is alleged, Reynolds, the effects of which was to dislodge 2 of his teeth, break a third, and generally to bruise his face. Amidst the wildest tumult, the Glasgow men were hustled into the shelter of the pavilion." Jerry Reynolds was arrested and questioned by police later that evening, but the matter was resolved when he agreed, without admitting any offence, to buy the man a new waistcoat to replace the one ruined by blood. A second correspondent in his account reported, "In the melee, several of the players received rough handling. A participator caught Campbell by the throat, as is apparent by a couple of bruises thereon. Kelly, the quietest and most amiable of all fellows, was made acquainted with the unfriendly toe of somebody's boot. The Parkhead men aver strongly that they were first molested. On the other hand, some of the spectators most interested say the hasty temper displayed by 1 or 2 of the Celtic, aggravated no doubt by their defeat, was the cause of the whole disturbance." Celtic wrote a letter of complaint to the SFA, published in the Scottish Referee of the 24th of February, in which they complained the conduct of the Abercorn fans during the match, in all conscience, was the worst our team ever experienced on a football field, the execrable oaths and blasphemies yelled by the spectators being simply indescribable. The letter further stated that after the match, our men were unable to enter the pavilion, were assailed with all sorts of vile epithets by the crowd, were kicked and otherwise severely assaulted and battered, Kelly, Doyle, Gallagher, Madden and Campbell being especially selected for the favour of the crowd. There were only 3 policemen visible on the field, and these were utterly powerless to preserve order." At a hearing on the 28th of February, Abercorn Secretary Archibald Eagleson submitted a letter blaming the whole thing on Dan Doyle, who he said had kicked a boy who had passed some remark to him. The letter, published in the Scottish Referee of the 3rd of March 1893, concluded, "I may say that it originated from the Celtic players who have only themselves to blame for what happened." Despite the referee having been assaulted by home fans at the end of a match against 3rd Lanark a few weeks before, the committee decided Abercorn had taken all reasonable precautions and, against the chairman's advice, incredibly voted by 11-4 to exonerate Abercorn of any blame for the incident. The Abercorn incident was not the best preparation for the Glasgow Cup final the following week, lost 3-1 to Rangers in what was the Ibrox club's first ever victory over Celtic. It had only taken them 5 years.